AI is using our data, our conversation to train, and that becomes publicly accessible.
I'm going to gift everybody, a pencil and a notepad, and let's just, go back to that.
Hey everybody, Reggie here with Vistasocial's Beyond Social podcast, the podcast that's focused on going on behind the scenes on how we're building a tool for marketers. And very interesting, recently Vitaly and I were on a call and I was talking to a customer, and they asked us to pause or to not start recording with our AI recording tool. And initially it was about, at least I thought, privacy, right? Assigning some privacy, and of course, we won't record. But after talking a little bit more about that with them, it ended up being this concept that, hey, AI is using our data, our conversation to train, and that becomes publicly accessible, and other people will be able to access maybe even proprietary information from our conversation to inform them or to help them with whatever tool. So that's what I want to get to today. I know we talked about that before.
This was certainly an aha moment kind of for me. It's one of those things where people sometimes, when you talk about privacy, some folks would be like, hey, I got nothing to hide. There is nothing sort of private, like, you can look at my emails and whatnot and things like that. And perhaps I was thinking that there is really nothing overly private or proprietary in our conversations with customers, to where the AI recorder, you should also kind of point out that the purpose of the AI recorder was to turn it into notes, right? It's a super convenient feature where you do the demo, this tool records, turns it into really nice summary of what the conversation was about, beats, kind of writing notes yourself. That's really the purpose of it. But I was kind of overlooking the notion of where this information remains, where the residue kind of is still out there, right, of this information. So, and the user here, the customer, is completely right. I think while we may not be recording and sort of talking anything sensitive or private, but there could be a time when customer maybe discusses something proprietary to them or to their business, and that conversation is 100% private, right? And that trust is 100% there. We must enforce it. And to those of you who don't quite maybe understand where the AI plays into this, if AI is a system it's an algorithm that's trained using lots and lots of text and images in some cases to generate a certain outputs. This new sort of generation of AI engines is, for that reason, referred to as generative AI, because it's now has analyzed enough to be able to produce, right? So your content, whatever that is, in this case, the content of a demo turned into text, but the content itself landed in the model to then be used by algorithms to generate content off of it. How is that not giving up your secrets, in the most global way? How is that not making the most sensitive things, not just public, but like globally public? Like everybody in the world can then ask a question, and that information would influence the answer. So kudos to the customers for pointing that out. And I think we've now kind of like implemented the rule for not using AI, even internally. I'm going to gift everybody, a pencil and a notepad, and let's just, go back to that.
Definitely. And I think it touches a lot more industries too than I originally thought. I know that I've got a colleague that works in research, and, they'll get approached by big brands. And I probably shouldn't mention the brand names, but just big brands that are trying to get into a new country with their service or their product, these multinationals, and they hire them to do, investigate research, come up with analysis. And if you need to maybe use, ChatGPT or an AI model to translate this or to help you to phrase it nicely, it's just a reminder that, like, listen, this proprietary data is getting fed into an AI engine, and that data is getting used to train, and again, becomes exposed for, God knows, Joe Schmo down the street decides, like, how do I enter Canada with this product? And all of a sudden, it's giving me the step-by-step that took hundreds of thousands of dollars of R&D for another company in order to achieve, right? So there's that part to it as
So I
well.
think that example that you were talking about, I think that was a pharmaceutical company, right? Which we're not going to name, but yeah, totally. So your brother works on sensitive research, right? His research, as well as maybe the company's research, something super secret, something super carefully managed and protected. He feeds it into some sort of a simple translation or recommendation. Hey, it's ChatGPT, can you please summarize this? Or can you, translate that into, Portuguese or something? And all of a sudden that input, that sensitive input, unbeknownst to you, is kind of landing in the knowledge base of, and think of it as, I don't know, depending on your generation, think of it as an encyclopedia of knowledge or in a database of knowledge, but it's there now for everybody to mine. So I don't know necessarily if it's going to be to the point of, let's say, your brother somehow included some sort of a very sensitive, I don't know, recipe or formula. And then can somebody say, how do you cure cancer or something? And that formula shows up. I mean, I don't know the extent of how the models are learning and how much of that, but it could certainly be exposing that detail. But then again, I think these examples, like workplace examples, are somewhat sort of sensitive, and these are the two examples that we just provided. But on a personal level, people use AI within their email services, within their document folders. They turn on AI on the computers. I think we all need to understand that AI informs AI. AI learns. So are you really willing to make your data public? Because it's very different from some maybe old-era tools that were just dealing with your information. There may be some spell checker that only checked your document right there in your Microsoft Word, right? Or some spam filter that identified something as a spam within your mailbox, right? That's quite different from what this brings, right? This brings global knowledge, right? So the spell checking body of text, so that text in the model, like that spam checker that tries to understand what's spam and what's not, the body of text that it's analyzing goes into the model. Can anybody be comfortable with this? Like, I don't know, but if indeed, like, you don't have anything to hide maybe, or if like, but listen, arguably I don't have anything to hide, like, but there are probably things in my life, definitely, that I probably don't view as public data, publicly available sort of information. So yeah, so I think we're just trying to remind people that using AI implies supporting the continued learning of the AI system using your data, the one that you've inputted.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to comment on that, but I just want to make it clear, my brother does not use AI. This is a conversation on when he brought up his hesitation. He had his hesitation. He has used vistasocial in the past, and when I brought up the AI feature when we had released
that's interesting. So the company does not require him to kind of...
like it's a no.
So
like the policy
is not
no
to use
AI
it. That
usage.
makes sense. There you go. So that makes sense.
So as we
I
chatted
bet that
about,
they don't use AI in Zoom calls either then.
No.
There you go. So they know.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I think it goes even further than that, right? Because obviously we're talking about companies, but I mean, I don't know if you've seen, they have AI assistants now that will go through your entire inbox and write sentiments and prioritize your inbox into different labels. Like, this model is learning from reading your email and is getting, again, that becoming public. And I want to make it clear. I've read a couple of terms of service from a couple of different AI recorders and tools like that say that they don't use your personal data or the input that you provide to train their models. But the hesitation here, or maybe at least the suggestion that I might bring to this conversation, is until we have legislation that makes it abundantly clear on if and when and how that data is processed and utilized in AI training, I'd probably stay away.
This reminds me of history and the tech sometimes repeats itself. So years ago when Alexa comes out, right, and the Alexa, so Amazon starts shipping Alexas and it's in their home, people soon discover that it records, right? And apparently there was an option to shut it off. and not turned back on, something like that. But the point was that it turned out that it was not honoring the request not to record. And it just kept on recording and recording and recording, and eventually it came out. And you might think that somebody got in trouble, say maybe got penalized, sued. Nothing like that. Amazon just apologized and shipped the fix. But for years, they kept on recording contrary to what they've promised. So I frankly don't see much accountability or to hold anybody even accountable for the promises they make in those terms of services. So some products would claim that free versions of their tools do inform models and paid versions do not. I mean, good luck enforcing that, if that's true or not. Who in the end audits them? Nobody. So the legislation would certainly help, but we are in such infant stages of even contemplating what that legislation is going to do. The most I've seen so far was, I believe, like an executive action semi-recently, that sort of dealt with needing to label content as AI generated. But that's not even the tip of the iceberg. Somebody needs to clearly explain to the user where is the information going, or find ways to make informing the global model just completely impossible. I feel like OpenAI and others just had this freedom of just analyzing, thousands of books and messages and, et cetera, et cetera. So, but it's hard to really understand the obligations that they have, or not maybe obligations, but the safety checks, or, the safety for you, right, for the user. Is there a boundary that your data is not going to cross? Will it always remain on your computer? It's difficult to kind of assess that even today without the AI. Computers get hacked, all sorts of things can happen to them. Right? So how much trust do we have to Apple's cloud system, right, that stores your data? But let's assume, at least in that scenario, it's in your account, it's properly encrypted, right? There are systems in place. We sort of trust that because that's an established systems, right? But AI, that's a very different story.
I think it's probably maybe a little old information, but the whole Google situation, where for a while they were saying that their private browsing wasn't getting saved or downloaded. We've just learned that that's not necessarily the case, right? So big multinational with something that's been around for a while. Private browsing is not new. And now we're talking about a completely new disruption to, or maybe even creation of a new industry, right? With AI, without the legislation, without the enforcement, without the ability to hold these companies accountable to that, right? It's murky waters for any organization or any individual, really.
And to those people who sort of say that, listen, I got nothing to hide, as I often find myself, reasonably, I am a law-abiding citizen. I cross the street on a green light only, so I do nothing to invoke anger of a government entity with 3 letters. But am I okay with, let's say, them having access to my search history in my browser? Would I be okay? No. I've searched for stuff probably in my lifetime that I won't be entirely comfortable with people knowing about, and that probably and that's just a tiny example. I think we just underappreciate how much private stuff happens, within emails, within messaging, and I'm not even entering the subject of the dangers of the AI itself on the society. That's part of, another topic and conversation. But what happens to your data, bank account information, your emails, your texts, every time I turn around, a new product introduces AI. AI on my phone. Isn't Apple saying that they're going to have ChatGPT or something on the phone? There you go. So it's everywhere, right? And again, I'm the kind of tech user. My screen time, I think, on my phone is probably under an hour, and I'm trying to get it under 30 minutes as my next step of evolution. But that's unrealistic for many people. That's where their life is, and just the more AI you use, the more likely your data is informing the broader AI for everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, some people will be dead set on, I've got nothing to hide. And listen, you're good. That's fine. But remember, if you're working for a company, you're using AI, that data is not yours. It's proprietary information. That's not yours, right? You're opening yourself up to some liability in that regard as well. So if anything, if all else, then at least remember that part, right?
I think that's a great point. I mean, your life is your responsibility, but for an organization, for you to kind of subject others people's data to AI. But that's ultimately, I think, the responsibility of the actual organizations to put those kind of policies in place and processes in place to prevent it. So an employee inadvertently doing it would not be necessarily an employee's. So, I mean, but that's the kind of challenge that I feel has been sort of solved in many different ways today. Work laptops are, protected in a variety of ways. So it's going to be quite simple for employers to to restrict access when necessary. But it is one of those fairly sort of gullible states that, we're all in, where we only see the utility part of the AI and not what makes AI, right? The actual algorithms, right? And that's kind of where hopefully people can get enlightened and just aware of the risks. And yeah, the extreme option would be to minimize or not use AI. Highly unlikely, because I think AI is enabled in many places by default. Not everybody's going to know. But be aware, be sensitive to, again, if not your data, then somebody else's data. And every time you use AI to handle your content, just tell yourself, with the click of this button, everybody will have access to this information. Just for as long as you say that and still continue, you're probably good to go.
All right. Well, thanks, Vitaly. Thanks, everybody, for listening into this week's episode. As always, check out Beyond Social Podcast at vistasocial.com/Beyond Social. And wherever you're consuming this, make sure you give it a like, thumbs up, comment, let us know if there's any other topics you'd like us to cover. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you.